Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to finish up Chapter 6 as we take a look at feeding back data. We're also going to take a look at one or two more ways of being able to collect data without having to involve the people of that organization. So let's go ahead and get started this morning with unobtrusive data, feedback data, and we'll go from there. Okay, welcome back, everybody, and today we're going to finish up Chapter 6 by taking a look at some other methods that you have to be able to collect data. Now, we've looked at observations, we've looked at interviews and surveys and questionnaires and so forth, and all of those have their place. They have their advantages and disadvantages, but there's another method that you can use where you don't have to worry about interacting with people as much, and these are unobtrusive measures. And primarily what we're talking about with unobtrusive measures is when we go and we collect material that's already been written. For instance, if you want to look at the financial performance of a company over the past 5 years, you don't have to go and interview the accountants or the chief financial officer. All you need to do is just get their financial records, and you can take a look at that and get the information that you need. We're not invading other people's time, space, so unobtrusive measures allow you to be able to collect data without interfering with the normal day work activity of the employees or management or the executives. Now, in research, you're going to have what we call primary and secondary data. When it comes to research, primary data really covers what we have already considered. Primary data is going to the source and getting your information there. For instance, observations would be considered primary data because you're watching people as their activities occur. Interviews, you're going and talking to the people. Surveys, you are actually polling people. So you are there firsthand, you're getting firsthand knowledge, and that's the most accurate and the most up-to-date information. However, secondary data is research that's derived from existing literature and reports and so forth that you can gather up without even bothering people. Now, the advantages of unobtrusive measures such as this type of data, secondary data, is that you don't have any response bias. When you collect the data, it says what it says. They will indicate what is going on. Data are not biased. They are not looking for an agenda or trying to save face. Data will tell you what they have to say, and that's it. And as a result of that, you do have a high degree of validity. It is valid. And valid means that it is giving you what it's supposed to give you. If I want financial information, I'm going to go and look at financial reports, and that's exactly what I'm going to get. A lot of times when you're interviewing people, you may seek to get information, but you're unable to because people are misleading at times. And some of the problems that we saw with interviews and even observations, it may not be that valid because we are biased in many ways. Also, these data are easily quantified. That means we can measure data more easily than we can observations maybe or interviews. So when you are quantifying, you are putting into numerics the information that you want to get. So if I wanted to look at the past 5 years of financial performance of Mid-America, then I should easily be able to go back through their financial reports and take a look at what they've done and quantify that, average it out, or whatever I'm looking for. Now, there are other major potential problems, and that's dealing with access and retrieval difficulties. Some people may not want to give you information. And that's why you need to go on and do a 10K for a company, especially if they are trading with the Securities and Exchange Commission. If they're publicly traded, they have to give out an annual report. And you may be able to get information there where you wouldn't be able to get it anywhere else. Other companies who aren't that big, it may be more difficult for you to get that information. Some companies are very territorial. They are very apprehensive when it comes to releasing that information. So it can be a challenge for you to be able to get what you need. Validity concerns. Again, sometimes if the company is not going to be forthcoming with information, some companies will skew information. Enron was a prime example. When you take a look at Enron, and there are all types of YouTube videos on Enron, how they misrepresented data to make their company look good, how they falsified documents and accounting information. That does happen. Hopefully it's been curtailed now since you have all the litigation that came out of Enron, but still in all, you have to worry about validity. And sometimes it's difficult to code and interpret this type of data. When you are looking at maybe numbers, the numbers are just going to reveal descriptive data. It's not going to tell you the why of your research. It's going to tell you the what of your research. So if you went in and did a study of Mid-America and we've been booming for the last 5 years, it's just going to tell you we've been booming. It's not going to tell you why. We might have had several big donors die over the last couple of years and they've left all their money to us. So you can never really tell because it doesn't give you context. It just tells you what is. Now, when it comes to sampling, I believe we've talked about this before, but really one of the things that you need to look at is population and a random sample of the population. Now, you can do it in layers, which is stratified, or you can take a look at doing a random sample, which is really the most popular way of deriving a proportion of the total population so that that sample or that number of people that you've chosen will be a representative, an accurate representation of what the total population would want. For instance, if you wanted to know from Memphians what do they prefer, Tops Barbecue or maybe Rendezvous Barbecue, well, you're not going to go to every house in Memphis and ask them. That would be unrealistic, and it would probably be impossible to really be able to do if you're especially trying to get information in a timely manner. So what would you do? You would choose whatever selection method you would use, but you would choose a random sample out of the population of Memphis. And let's say Memphis had a population of 900,000. You may send out a survey of 900, and if that's, you believe, enough to accurately reflect Memphis, then that would be fine. You can use that. But sample size, as you see here, is important. If I just went out and asked 5 people, what do you like better, Tops or Rendezvous, then that's not going to be a representative sample of Memphis altogether. So you have to make sure for the authenticity and validity of your study, you would have to take a look at what is an actual number that's going to represent the total population of those living in Memphis. Now, one of the ways that we can determine when it comes to change, when it comes to what we're talking about now, one of the things that we can use to help us assess the direction and what we have to face when it comes to the organization and research and all of that is to look at what we see here as the force field analysis of work group performance. A guy named Miller came up with this. And as you see here, we have two elements. We have the forces for change, and then we have the forces for the status quo. In the middle is the meeting point where those two forces collide, and that's the current performance. Now, if you want to analyze, if you want to change, this would be one of the first steps. Now, if you've had me in the past, you've had an overview of what we call the SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization. Now, a SWOT analysis is just like this. It lets us know what's going on right now. This is not a prediction of the future. It's not something that will forecast anything. It's just telling you right now, this is how it is. Now, in this case, we have, let's say, the forces for change. New technology is emerging. So we need to be prepared for that. So we might need to change our strategy or our structure. There are better raw materials now that we can take advantage of to help us improve as an organization. There's competition from other groups, and that's always a force for change. If you remember when I was talking to you about Michael Porter, Porter had what he called the 5 forces, and one of those forces was the threat of new rivals and competition. So a driving change will always be, at least one of those driving changes will always be competition. And then supervisor pressures. You may have management coming down and wanting to change and do new things. So all of these, and there are more. This is just a small example of the forces that will drive change and really require organizations to change. But you also have an opposite effect or an opposite force that's driving against change, and these are the forces for maintaining the status quo. So you may see here group performance norms, and they may be, really, this is the way we've done it, we don't want to change mentality. Then you may have fear of change, and that's always going to be, normally will always be, a driving force for maintaining the way things are. Member complacency. And this is just the people are satisfied with the way things are. They are really not motivated. They just want to keep things, let's don't rock the boat, let's just keep things the way they are. And then well-learned skills. It may be that they would have to learn new things, and they may be apprehensive towards that. So as you have forces for change, you have forces for maintaining the status quo, and then they meet right there in the middle, which is the current performance. Now, how do you interpret all of this, and what can you do with this information? Well, if you notice here, the goal is to get to the far right, which is desired performance. And you need to remove that barrier there between current performance and desired performance. Anything that represents the distance between where you're at and where you want to be is called a problem. So you want to eliminate the problem. So how would you do that? Well, notice this. What do you see that is particular about these arrows? Are there any irregularities that you see among these arrows? Well, since you can't talk online, let me tell you, these arrows have different lengths. That means they have different strengths within that force. For instance, new technology is not a big compared to the other forces for change. It's not a long arrow compared to supervisor pressures. Fear of change is not as large as group performance norms. So you want to take a look, and again, this is subjective. Just like a SWOT analysis, this is your subjective opinion about the way things are. You get to determine the forces for change. You get to determine the forces to keep things the way they are, because this is your organization. And you also determine the magnitude of those strengths. And depending on the magnitude of those strengths will determine how large the arrow is. But if you notice here, let's see, one of the forces for change would be, let's say, new technology. Well, what would be a counter to new technology? Well, if you look at the bottom, we see well-learned skills. So well-learned skills, the people not wanting to learn new skills, is larger than the new technologies that we can take advantage of. So we see right there, we can't go head-to-head with just new technology against well-learned skills, people not wanting to learn that. So we might have to enlist the help of a stronger arrow, which might be, let's say, supervisor pressure. So the supervisor might get involved, and he or she might say, listen, this is what we've got to do. We have new technology at our disposal. We're going to use it, and that's it. So you could eradicate well-learned skills by just matching your forces for change together and overwhelming those forces for the status quo. And you do that with each one. The fear of change is not very large when it comes to the forces for maintaining the status quo. So you might be able to use competition from other groups, put the fear of maybe losing their job because they're going to be obsolete if they don't change, because the competition is going to drive them out of business. So little by little, you take a look at the forces for change and the forces for maintaining the status quo, and that will get you, once the status quo has been eradicated, that will move you toward the desired performance. And that's really what strategy is. Whether you use a SWOT analysis or whether you use a force field analysis, both are very effective if you use it properly. And I would suggest you practice both of these models as you develop into a manager, supervisor, or even an executive. Now also, before I forget and move on to the next step, just as a SWOT analysis can be used in anything, you can use this in anything. You may want to buy a new house. You may want to get married. You may want to do any number of things. You can put the forces for doing it and the forces that are against you together and develop a strategy for that too. So that's just a little give me there that you can incorporate not just into your professional or ministry, but also into your personal life. Now, feeding back data, really feedback is essential, but it's one of the most overlooked. We oftentimes get bogged down in the doing without assessing what we've done or how we're doing it. So what you're looking at is with feeding back data, as you see, the success of data feedback depends largely on its ability to arouse organizational action and to direct energy towards problem solving. So that's the goal. You want to stir the organization into action and also create enough energy so that you can really take care of whatever problem that you may have that may come your way. And both the content and process of data feedback impact whether the organization will be energized to act. So you need to understand the fundamentals of feedback, how to incorporate it and how to administer it, and challenge the organization, motivate them, and invigorate them a lot of times into taking the actions needed to bring about the change that's going to be necessary. These are some of the, when it comes to content of feedback, these are fairly self-explanatory. The feedback needs to be relevant and understandable. If it's not, then you're wasting your time. Descriptive. You need to describe exactly what's been going on, how it's affected this, that, or the other. Verify it. It needs to be verifiable. It doesn't need to be just your opinion, but you need to back it up with numbers, statistics, or whatever. So, timely. It does need to be within the time constraints where it's going to be relative and so forth, significant. All of these things are going to be necessary to have effective and appropriate feedback. Some of the limitations, just like we said in some of the content, you may have an ambiguity of purpose. What are you trying to get at? What is your ultimate goal or purpose for doing the research or whatever? Distrust. If people have a bad track record, or if they don't trust the ones doing the research or the company that's reporting it, whatever, that may come into play. You may have unacceptable topics which are maybe taboo to that organization or to those people. And then organizational disturbances. You can have disconnects within an organization that can also limit your ability to do feedback. Well, folks, today we saw feedback data, unobtrusive data, and the importance of both. Maybe now you'll get a better appreciation of how we can collect data and the complexities of it all. Well, that's all we have for this week. Hope you have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.